Welcome, everybody. My name is Daphne Lazar Price, and I am the Executive Director of JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with Rachel Tuchman. This will be a Tu B'Av conversation called Enchanted. Today we'll be exploring building healthy relationships, the concept of Shalom Bayit, spiritual approaches to strengthening relationships, and some love themes in Jewish texts. I want to say a word about Rachel. Rachel is a licensed mental health counselor with over 15 years of experience serving diverse populations. Her work has included supporting incarcerated women at Rikers Island, children and adults with developmental delays, overwhelmed parents, teens facing life's challenges, and women navigating infertility or other major life transitions. She is a HAES, Health at Every Size aligned clinician, and is passionate about educating parents and children on body respect and true health practices. Rachel currently offers services in her Cedarhurst, New York office. So I want to start by just naming that this weekend will mark Shabbos Nachamu and also Tu B'Av. It doesn't always fall that way, but this year the dates align. So what is Tu B'Av? Today it's considered Judaism's ancient festival of love. It has often been described as a kind of Jewish Valentine's Day, for lack of a better example. But beneath the simplicity of that comparison lies a more layered and powerful message, especially for those of us committed to Judaism that is both traditional and feminist and invested in having relationships, strong, healthy relationships. According to the Mishnah, Tu B'Av was one of the two most joyous days on the Jewish calendar. It was a day when unmarried women would dress in white, go out to the vineyards and dance. It was a kind of dating game. On its face, it was a celebration of romantic love, community bonding, and new beginnings. And maybe if we think about it, when they're like single weekends on Shabbos Nachamu, it's kind of sometimes a variance of the same. But if we look at it more deeply, Tu B'Av also gestures towards something more radical, a vision of respect, renewal, and agency. The Mishnah notes that all the women wore borrowed white dresses so that no one would feel ashamed if she didn't have her own. Class distinctions were temporarily erased, and beauty and wealth and status were not meant to be deciding factors in a match. And though it's easy to frame the scene as heteronormative and patriarchal, young women dancing for the male gaze, it's just as meaningful to see it as a rare moment in ancient Jewish life where women publicly claimed their space, their worth, and their hope for love on their terms. I'm just going to give a quick Jewish frame. I'm not going to do a deep dive into specific relationships that exist in our tradition. I do want to give three different kind of frames for how our tradition really values relationships and strengthening them. And I'll just start by reminding folks that in Sefer Shemot, when Paro decreed to throw all of the male-born children into the sea to be drowned, that the Talmud in Sota talks about Amram, Moshe's father, who, when he heard Paro's terrible decree, becomes hopeless about their future, and in order to avoid any possibility of pregnancy, he divorces Yocheved. And then other people do the same. And the Talmud continues and says that his daughter Miriam chastises him, that his decree is harsher than Paro's, because then there just won't be any continuity or any relationships. And so as a result of Miriam, Amram and Yocheved reunite. I also want to share a reflection in Parsha Ba'alotcha, where Miriam notices that Tzipporah is sad and withdrawn. When she asks her what's wrong, according to the Midrash, Tzipporah confides that Moshe no longer approaches her as a husband, and Miriam gets really mad on her behalf. She defends Tzipporah's dignity and questions why Moshe, even though he's a prophet, should abandon the marital bond that the Torah itself sanctified. And when she talked to Aaron, she argued that Hashem spoke to many other prophets, but none of them withdrew from their spouses. Miriam's concerns stem from solidarity with Tzipporah and a belief that honoring women within marriage was really important. We also know that Miriam was punished because it was seen as slander, but she stood up for her sister-in-law and for the value of being in a healthy relationship, and it's a story that's contained in our narrative. And then the last one I just want to share quickly has to do also back to when Bnei Israel was enslaved in Mitzrayim, and and Paro forced them to separate, the couples to separate. And the Midrash Tanhuma describes how Rabbi Shimon, the son of Chalafta, said, so what did the Israelite women do? They would go to the Nile to draw water, and Hashem would fill their jugs with little fish, and they would sell some and cook some and prepare some and buy some wine with their sales, and then bring it to their husbands in the fields. And then they would play this flirtatious game involving mirrors, that while the men were eating and drinking, the women would take out their mirrors and glance into them with their husbands, kind of like an ancient day selfie, where they would both be looking at it together, and they would say, I am more attractive than you. And the men would reply, I am handsomer than you. And that way they would arouse each other's sexual desires and stay connected. And these mirrors are so important that they were actually a part of the building of the Mishkan that we would read about later on. So that's the Jewish frame that I want to give to this. And now we're going to hear from Rachel, which is why people are here. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in this work, in your work, and in advocating for healthy relationships in the Orthodox community.
Okay, so my name is Rachel Tuchman. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I work in the five towns, Cedarhurst, New York. Originally, when I started my practice, I wanted to work with, I definitely wanted to work with incarcerated individuals. My first job out of grad school was working in in a jail setting. And then I eventually knew, though, that was kind of just to gain experience so that I could really see like the entire like mental health, mental illness spectrum, which I definitely did. But I knew I wanted to work with kids. That was kind of always my passion. I knew in general, advocacy was my thing. I wanted to advocate for criminals, and I wanted to advocate, to deal with compassion with them, understanding there was life circumstances behind some of, their crimes and their behavior, a lot of trauma, a lot of that stuff. And then obviously working with kids, advocating for them, helping them find their voice, being someone who's there for them when they can't control their circumstances. That's kind of always been, we know therapists usually go into this field because we are fixers. We want to heal people's pain. So that's kind of what I did. And it was interesting because I never thought I would really want to work with adults, but over COVID, a lot of my clients were kids and they did not want to be on Zoom because they were on Zoom all day long with their schools. So I ended up working with a lot of parents, and I actually realized I liked working with adults. And, again, since I've kind of always been in the work of relationships, working with kids, with their parents, with their siblings, whatever, it was kind of like a natural shift anyway, to be working with adults and navigating their relationships with their in-laws or their kids or their partners. From there, I started seeing a lot of people who were in the dating world, trying to figure out, how to navigate what they want, the dating scene, dealing with their parents, let's say, while they're dating, or the pressures of that. And I guess just being like a Jew in the Jewish community and seeing what goes on, and being a parent who, I have kids approaching that age. Like there's really a lot that we need to be talking about. And again, just as a therapist who's seen kids, adults, I've seen the gamut, like there really is a lot of work that needs to be done that could prevent so many of the issues that we have in families, marriages, relationships, communities. And it starts way before you're dating. It starts way before you get married. And I think that's something that we need to talk about. And ironically, it really starts with the parent-child relationship. That's the first like loving relationship you have. And what you witness between your parents is the first model of what a romantic relationship or a marriage should look like. So it's important to talk. And again, you can have parents who, let's say, are divorced or didn't have a great marriage, but you can still have your own great marriage. But it takes that awareness and self-awareness and work and commitment to learn what healthy relationships are to be able to change, that trajectory for yourself and not repeat the same cycles of dysfunction and build something better for yourself. So that's kind of where that's my long way of saying that it's just been through the multiple, different areas that I've worked in, that it's kind of, it's always the same theme that's running through my work. And I really just want people to understand that like this is not something that's beyond our control. Like we have the power to fix this, you know? So learning and willingness to grow and change and have conversations is how we do it.
Amazing. And do you want to give like a momentary disclaimer since
Yes.
you are a professional?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So everything here that we are talking about is education. Nothing here is, rules for your personal circumstance. There may be something that resonates with you that you say, oh, I'm going through something similar. If I say something that, sounds like advice, it's not. I don't know you and I don't know your personal circumstances, but here, everything here is just for learning, for I think just, self-reflection. And if something does speak to you, I would encourage you to definitely follow up with a mental health provider, professional, and talk more about it. But yes, everything here is just for educational purposes.
Great. Thank you. Um, so there's a lot of positive to be gained from, being an Orthodox Jew and what we read and what we learn. But sometimes subjects and themes can maybe be misinterpreted or misapplied. For example, we're very pro-marriage, but not all of our communities are pro-dating unless for the purpose of marriage. Are there things that you can learn from, in your experience and maybe from Jewish, background about developing and securing interpersonal relationships, healthy relationships?
Yes. So I think that it's like a common misconception, or again, maybe it's just because of how we've operated that like the goal is always just to get married. And we don't think about anything after that. It's like get them to the chuppah and then like, good, you're on your own, guys. But the Torah is very much a guide on how to have meaningful connections, not just in your marriage, but in relationships in general. We do believe that relationships should be deep and meaningful and spiritual and motivating, and that your partner should be helping you be a better person and vice versa. So I think sometimes we skip the part where like emotional intelligence and self-awareness and relationship skills need to be developed because we're just thinking like, you have a pulse, let's get them together and get them married. So I think that sometimes when dating is treated only as a vehicle to get people married, there's this pressure to decide quickly. And, you don't really have the time or space to get to know each other. Forget all those things that you're worried about. Red flag. What do you mean it's fine? It'll probably go away when you're married. And we're not allowing people the space to trust their gut, ask questions, have conversations, even. Maybe it feels like a red flag, but when you talk about it, it's actually not a red flag and it's fine. And it's something that could be resolved or fixed or talked about. But I think that when we see dating only as a means to an end, then we don't really have room to notice how someone is communicating, how they're managing stress, how they're responding to my emotional needs or concerns. And that there's not really room for curiosity, right? Not, and we're only asking like, are they checking off the boxes, right? And not like, what is it like to be in a relationship with this person? So I think we need to make more room for learning. We need to talk about, talk with the person about their lives, about who they are, about how they view the world, about how they grew up in their families, about their views on finances and division of responsibility in the home, and also about yourself, how you show up in a partnership and how you handle conflict and what you want and what you need beyond what you were told you should want by maybe your seminary teacher or your parents or whoever. Um, but I think also dating can be a growth process. I know people hate dating, don't like doing dating, don't want to have to date a few people. But I would say, even if you're in that world or your child is in that world right now and they're dating, just reminding them that each person that they go out with, it can be a growth experience. You're learning more about what you like, what you don't like. Um, but again, if we're overly focused on the outcome, getting married, we really risk the development of the skills that sustain marriage and that make a healthy relationship. So I think that's very important to really focus on the big picture. It's not just the wedding, it's everything after. We're not just trying to get them married, we're trying to help them find a beautiful relationship, to build a home, to build a family. And that goes beyond, just a few dates and talking about surface things. So I think that's important. It requires intentionality and self-awareness, and I think we have to encourage our kids, or if you yourself are in it, it's okay to like stop and think and question and be curious and have those uncomfortable conversations that a lot of couples feel like they can't have, don't want to have, but you need to have, right?
Yeah,
Those
I mean, you mentioned finances, and a lot of times Yeah, I mean, I know when I was young, and getting married, that like we didn't even know the questions to ask necessarily.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's really important. I think it's also what you said, excuse me, about you alluded to it about being hyper focused on the wedding when we should be talking about the marriage, before and after. The wedding is one day. It's an important day and it should be a beautiful day, but at the end of the day, it is one day. Um, yeah. So, and I think I guess like my other curiosity is, you mentioned this also, everybody's like on their best behavior dating, but then how do you like peel back that layer? So like maybe he doesn't always wear a pressed shirt and tie, but he shows up nicely. And then when you see him like, after you're engaged and not dressed as nice, and the same for her and but like, I guess, how do you like peel back those layers?
So I think that that goes back to kind of what I was saying before. Like you have to have more meaningful conversations. And again, I think that in dating, certainly in more, I would say, I guess maybe I don't want to call out any certain sex, but there's
Mhm.
definitely some communities where they they discourage certain conversations and they want to keep things very surface. Like, don't get into that too much. It's like that's not appropriate to ask, or that's too deep, or that's, and I'm always wondering, like, why aren't we having those conversations? That's how you determine if this person makes sense for you. You get to see the real side of someone when you talk about things like finances and like what are the kinds of things that you're going to talk about with your parents about our relationship? Are you going to tell them about every fight we have? And like, how, what are we going to do about Yontif if your parents want us to come, but my parents want us to come? Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to navigate that? And when we have kids, are you going to want me to stay home or are you going to be okay if I want to work? Like, how's that going to work? And if I do, and if I want to stay home and I don't want to go to work, how are we going to navigate that financially? Are you okay with that? Are you going to resent me that I want to be a stay-at-home mom or dad? Like, these are conversations to have. How are we going to deal with halachic questions? Are you going to go to a rabbi? Do I like that rabbi? Or are we going to navigate things, are we asking your rabbi what job to take, or we're asking like real like halachic questions? So how are we navigating that piece? These are important conversations, but when we keep conversations shallow because we want to be safe, and I think
Right.
sometimes we want to be safe because we don't want the relationship to end. We don't want to have to say like he's not for me, she's not for me. But that should be the whole point, to figure out how do they navigate these conversations. And by the way, I don't have to agree, but I have to see how they are when we disagree. So maybe I don't like the whole idea. Maybe we're not necessarily on the same page about bank accounts and finances, but how are we talking about this, And can we figure it out? How do we navigate that conflict and the disagreement? We don't always have to agree on everything, but what are we doing about that? So again, I think opening up these more sensitive conversations and not avoiding them. And I find that sometimes it's under the guise of maybe it's not appropriate or it's tznius or halacha, I don't know. But really, I think it's just an uncomfortableness that people don't want to talk about it. And I say, like, this is how you get to know a person. So have those vulnerable conversations, have the conversations that matter for your marriage and your life, and those aren't always comfortable, but that's the reality.
Absolutely. So, let's talk about dating advice. Um, how do you ask for good advice? What do you do when you get bad advice? What guy, like how, especially for like people who really want something or don't have the right experience. You might think you're getting good advice. It might be really bad advice. You might be getting really like it's just, I guess I'm trying to ask what advice do you have to give to people about asking for advice about, during their relationships?
So I think it's important to remember that not everyone who wants to give advice and guide you knows exactly how to give good advice and guide you. And it's not enough to be like, I'm married or I, talk to people that are married. Like that doesn't make you someone who gives good advice. I've heard terrible advice from married people. I've heard great advice from non-married people. I don't think that professionals like me are the only people who can give good advice. I am not gatekeeping at all. I think there are people who are, in rabbinical rebbitzin positions that give great advice and don't have necessarily, clinical licenses. But I think it's important to know yourself, because not every piece of advice, even if it's good advice on the surface, applies to you. And I always think about this like in my own personal life about like parenting advice. There's some parenting advice that I see on parenting pages that I think it's great advice, but I know it would not work for me and my kid and my family. You have to kind of be the same way, be discerning. Like, okay, I understand that that's like probably like a nice concept, but like that doesn't work for me. It's okay to say, I don't agree with that. Again, this takes some level of self-awareness. So again, if you're someone who feels like maybe you're not so sure about who you are and what you want, and so that's something to explore. But understanding that there will be some advice that is great and good and still not for you, and some advice that's just straight up bad. And I say, if it's not landing well with you, maybe just trust that, right? That doesn't really make sense. Like, okay, I don't know, maybe in her life that, or his life, that's great, but like, that doesn't feel right. You're allowed to say that. So I think, also I feel like if it's like a very black and white rule, like this is how it is for everyone, that right away tells you like relationships are complex, they're nuanced. There's no one rule that applies across the board for everyone, obviously in terms of, let's say, abuse, fine, but in terms of just like the regular everyday stuff, there's so much complexity to it. So I think when someone speaks very matter of factly, this is how it is for everyone, this applies to across the board. I think that already also is maybe a good indicator of this is not good advice. But I think also sometimes we have to just even like trust ourselves and not be asking so much advice. Sometimes that's confusing. And I think sometimes it's good to even view, like if let's say you're talking to a friend or mentor, instead of them telling you what to do, you can kind of like, I always say, like in therapy, we're really not giving advice, right? We're just kind of mirroring your thought process, and we're asking questions to help you figure out what works. So maybe even viewing your conversations with friends or mentors like that way, nobody should be telling you, right? They can ask questions to help you be more thoughtful and figure out what you want for you, but maybe try having conversations like that. Not tell me what to do. Does this make sense? Well, what does that feel like for you?
Right.
And I think that's important. um, but I also say like read books about relationships. They're really helpful, you know? And that gives you a lot of insight. And again, even the things in the books, like figure out what makes sense for you. But I think it's really important to just know that there are things that you'll hear from people that you're allowed to disagree with. And that even again, on the surface, if it sounds great, it really might not be great for you individually. And I think that's like important for people to understand. For some people, go to bed angry, great advice. For a lot of people, not great advice.
I was actually just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, go to bed angry is great advice. It is. Like you don't have to have the fight. But for some people, maybe it's not. Maybe they need to hash it out before they go to sleep. And again, is that like a universal? But again, in relationships, there's no universal rules. And that's why I think if you have someone that's telling you, no, this is how you're supposed to feel, or this is how it's supposed to be, or this is how, you know, again, aside from abuse where there's very clear rules,
Yes.
it shouldn't be like that. We have so many different things to consider. So I think that's really important. And again, like I said, you have like there's gut feelings that we have. We can trust those, we can be curious about them. And I think that's important.
Yeah. I was going to say, when I got married, my father-in-law, Oliver Shalom, pulled me aside and said, look, you guys are like brand new. And this is funny advice, but it made sense then, and it kind of stayed with me. 26 years later, he was like, look, right now you're on this high, and then sometimes that, comes down or whatever, and there are going to be different things that get in the way of the things that you want to do together or separate. And he said, but if you're like okay 50% of the time and in love with each other 25% of the time and really not digging each other 25% of the time, that's all okay. That's, the ebbs and flows of a relationship. So it was just it was not so much about like what kind of advice to ask for to take, but just to like park in the back of my mind that like not everything is going to be amazing
Right. But I love
all
that.
the
I love
time.
that he reminded you or told you even like how real life and marriage is going to look, because then when you experienced maybe those ebbs and flows, you were like, okay, no, this is normal. And I think sometimes people don't realize that they get married and they have a fight and they're like, oh my God, like we're getting divorced because the fight was so bad. And they don't realize fights in marriage can have all different looks. And you might talk to your friend who says, oh, we don't fight like that, or we don't
Right.
ever fight, or whatever. And so then you think there's something wrong with you. But again, I think it's important to know that yes, every marriage has its moments, its ups, its downs. Sometimes you're like in heaven, love each other. Sometimes you can't stand each other. I wrote an article recently about the concept of marital hate, which is like, a thing that couples have never heard of. And I know personally, when I read about it years ago, I was like, whoa, like what? There's a name for this? You know, it's crazy to hear that there's this experience that you can love someone and be in a healthy marriage, but also have a point in your life where you feel this reaction of like, wait, I really don't like you right now. To give a name to that and say, like, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your marriage foundationally, but there's like some inner work to do here. This is what happens even in healthy, loving relationships. So important. And again, that's why I feel like this education, open conversations, reading books, is really important.
Do you have, not to put you on the spot, you can think about it and come back at the end, but do you have books that you recommend that people
Yes.
will read?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can send out a list even afterwards, but I love any books by Terry Real. He's fantastic. He actually is the one who coined this term marital hate. I learned it from his books. Obviously, John and Julie Gottman, fantastic, very famous researchers and therapists who talk a lot about relationships. I actually tell a lot of people to read their books when they're dating. But I'll definitely send a list of more. But those are like my two main authors who are like my go-to, who offer a lot of education. Also, Terry Real does a lot of like online stuff that you can just join for free. He does stuff on YouTube. Um, Really, really great. And Esther Perel, listening to her podcasts are always great. So there's so much out there in terms of like education that we can have that's accessible and free. Like there's really no excuse anymore for us to be ignorant. You don't even have to go to a therapist. You don't have to
Right.
there's so much there that you can get on your own, that you can figure a lot of this stuff out. So I think we should be taking advantage of it, of these resources.
Yeah. Um, so when we were planning this conversation, my colleague Jordana was like, "Can we talk about Shalom Bayit?" And I literally had no idea what she was talking about because it's not the world that I live in. But then when I did some digging around, there's Shalom Bayit Kogel and or Shalom Bayis Kogel and Shalom Bayis Challah, which I guess is like you make a multiple of like toppings on challah or a different kinds of kogels like in a single sheet pan so everybody gets what they want. But when I first looked it up, there was a story when I Googled Shalom Bayit Kogel. There was a story about a couple who went to a rabbi, and the husband said, I want to divorce my wife because she makes this kugel. But when we have kiddush, we have fish and all of these salads. And by the time we get to the kugel part, I'm too full. And so the rabbi comes back and says, you know what? Then you should make two kugels, one that you serve at kiddush and one that you serve with the meal. And it just felt like, and then they left happily ever after, which is on the one hand charming. On the other hand, um, the rabbi assigned all of the responsibility to the wife. And so I guess we talk about Shalom Bayit a lot. It gets thrown around for good and for bad. How do we make sure that when we talk about Shalom Bayis or Shalom Bayit, that we talk about the importance of partnership and compatibility, communication, division of labor and expectations, and I guess, well, we already talked about marital hate, but if we want to touch on that again.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, that's what I was thinking also, that he like made it the woman's responsibility. And I think it's important to remember that a relationship is a partnership, right? And it's also not appeasement. So it's not like, oh, I'll do whatever to make you happy. Like we have to talk about these things. And again, listen, in some relationships, people are okay with more traditional roles. They are fine with it. They want it themselves. But again, that needs to be a discussion. And I think that remembering also that like Shalom Bayit is like a shared piece. It's not like a silent suffering. So I wonder, they say, oh, they were so happy. I wonder, was she happy or was she resentful? Or, like, why couldn't he make the kugel he liked to say like, I'll make a kugel because I want in the morning and like you do the lunch one. Like, why wasn't there more kind of compromise here? But I think that these conversations are important because I think definitely I know in some circles, like the book Surrendered Wife was like a very popular thing that like college teachers were giving out. And again, that's all about like appeasement and like, just like kind of just like giving in and doing, and like then you'll get what you want from your husband and not having a voice. And again, I understand the thinking behind it, but I also don't think that that's grounds for a healthy relationship. There are two people involved. It is a partnership, and we want both partners actively involved. And I think that very often when we don't use our voice and we give in, what ends up happening is there is a resentment, and with resentment, nothing good comes of that.
Comes of it.
So I think that in terms of partnership and compatibility does not mean that you are the same. It's just about like a alignment in your core values, right? And a relational resilience even. So people think that, if we don't like the same things and we don't have the same personality and we don't always agree, like we're not compatible, but that's like very surface level. You can have two different temperaments. So one is more introverted, one's more extroverted, one's messy, one's clean, one loves sports, one loves, one loves nature, one loves.
One's a Republican, one's a Democrat.
Yes, especially that one too, right? Like, yes, you can have different hobbies. You can even have different ways of processing the world, right? And you can still be you can still be, sorry, deeply compatible if you know how to work through those differences together, and you can respect that about each other. And even, by the way, look at your partner and say, even if I don't agree, I actually really respect how they, how passionate they are about that, or how they navigate that, or how they live according to that value. Like you really don't have to be the same. But I think even in terms of like relational resilience, right? Like you have to know how to handle conflict and misunderstandings and how to change together, and understanding that compromise doesn't always mean that one person gets what they want. It might mean that I don't get what I want, and that neither of us gets what we want. But again, we navigate together with support and care. We're willing to grow, not just as individuals, but as a couple. We're willing to, this is something that the Gottmans talk about a lot, like accept influence from my partner. Like, not I'm always right and I know better and my way or the highway, and like that's your opinion and not, but like understanding that they might have something valuable to offer you, even if, like I said, you don't necessarily agree. But that's very important to feel like your partner is someone who could offer something to you in terms of growing as a person, bouncing back after hard moments with, again, willing to repair, connect, take accountability, apologize, responsibility. This is something that I've seen a lot in, when I work with couples who are dating or engaged. It's like not a language that they speak. And I'm not sure if it's because they didn't experience it from their parents. Their parents did not apologize to each other or to their kids. And I always say, please apologize to your kids. This is how they learn how to apologize, from you apologizing to them. It's not beneath you to apologize to your children. You're showing them the art of repair. But like they have a hard time with that. They think that it means that like they're a bad person, or like making that mistake means your partner is going to think that you're terrible. Repair is something that builds and helps your relationship grow. It creates trust and safety. So definitely like learning how to repair. And then again, I was talking about like alignment with those values, sharing a vision for life, which means like family, and again, it doesn't mean like, what do we do if our kid doesn't do homework? Do we agree with the same thing? No, just in general, like those core values of family and the kinds of people you want your kids to be. You don't always necessarily have to agree on the path to get there, but like who we want, like how do we want to be in the community? Who do we want to be in our community? How do we view, what are our views on faith? And again, you could have a partner who maybe has issues with his belief in God or her belief in God, but like, again, is still very committed. And so you can share a life together, and just your goals in general. So I think that's important to just, again, have like similar ideas about what's important, even if you go about those things differently, respecting each other's principles, again, even if they don't 100% align. That's really like the core here. So I think that just really, again, those conversations that need to happen that we said originally, like we have to talk about these things, because this is how we'll know how we're going to function. And again, if we want to have shalom in our house, we want to get along. That doesn't mean we never disagree. It doesn't mean we never fight. It means that we fight. And by the way, it could even be like not such a nice fight. Like, I didn't like how you spoke to me, and maybe you said some not nice things, but how do we repair afterwards? Hey, I really don't like how we spoke to each other. I wasn't at my finest. I shouldn't have said that. Let's try to revisit this conversation. I want to hear your point of view. I want to hear your point of view. Again, doesn't mean that I'll influence you or you'll change your mind, but like maybe we can just agree to disagree, and you can have that in a relationship. You can have a healthy relationship where you don't see eye to eye, but you just live together, right? Again, the Gottmans talk about this. It's called perpetual problems. I think it was like 60% of a couple's relationship will be those perpetual problems that don't ever get solved. So he never learns to move his shoes from in front of the door and you trip on them every day. Might be like a personal example, maybe not. Anyway,
Maybe.
it could be thing. There could be things that you just never agree on. You always fight about you know, forgetting this or doing that, or but again, it's not about that. It's like, how do we learn to just live with that tension of like, okay, there's some things that we just never agree on, and I'm not going to change him, and I'm not going to change her. It just is what it is. But I think people think that it has to all be like the checkbox, perfectly aligned.
Right.
We agree on everything. We think the same in every way. You don't want a partner like that. And I think even just the language of like Azer Kenegdo, right? Like it is your helpmate who is against you, right? Keneged you. Like there has to be some opposition. Otherwise, how are you living? How are you growing? How are you changing? We need a challenge. And so I think that having a partner who challenges the way you think and the way you feel and the way you act and even challenges parts of you to grow and deal with discomfort. This is what we want, you know? So I think that's really important also for people to recognize and think about.
Yeah, we have a running joke in this house. My spouse and I are very opposite in every which way. And the way when people ask, how do you manage them? Like, we give each other the space to do and be the things we need to be. But the running joke behind that, that's the serious part. The running joke behind that is one day we'll have a podcast called This Price is Right. So,
I like
but back to something you said. What do you do if you're with somebody who won't apologize? And at what point, like, to me, that would be a huge red flag. And at what point do you like recognize that as a red flag and something to contend with?
So that's where like a deeper conversation would happen where you could say, and again, if you don't feel safe to have that conversation, that's another red flag, right? But to say like, I notice you really have a hard time like owning up when, you know, when I tell you that I feel like you did something wrong or that I feel hurt, like it's very hard for you to take accountability and just say sorry. Like, what's up with that? And then see what happens. You're right. I don't know. I to get defensive. I shouldn't get defensive. You're right. It feels hard. As a kid, I was shamed a lot or I was always in trouble. And is there like a self-reflection or is there like, I don't know what you're talking about? No, that's when it's like, maybe there's a character flaw here. It's not just like an issue that they need to work on, but maybe it's a problem of character. And then that's information for you, that if they're so unwilling to take accountability and take responsibility and that they don't understand that saying sorry, it's not about whether or not I think I actually did anything wrong. I might think I did nothing wrong, but I still understand that I hurt you. And that's what matters. If they can't see that, then that's where I would wonder, like, is this the quality of a person that I want to be in a relationship with? Like, am I okay with that my whole life, never hearing I'm sorry and always being met with defensiveness? And is that the kind of example I would want to give to my kids? I think that's a deeper conversation to have. And again, it's not like break up with them. They never say sorry. Talk about it. Hey,
Right.
I noticed this. Like, what's up with that? And see how they navigate. They might get defensive in the conversation. And you could say, I'm coming from a place of like, I want this relationship to work. And like, I'm not trying to accuse and I don't want you to feel bad about yourself. I know that you love and care about me. And that's why it doesn't make sense when I bring something up that right away, it's so hard for you, right? Like, I think it's always important to frame it as like, I'm coming from a place of care. I'm not trying to attack you and see how they do with that. And if they don't handle it well, that's information that you really want to take into account, you know? And if you still feel confused, I would say like go to a professional, either together if they're willing. And if they're willing, that's great. That's a big green flag. Okay, you don't apologize and you struggle, but at least you're willing to come with me and talk with someone about it,
Right.
or even yourself and figure out like, is this a deeper issue that is a big red flag that maybe I need to like step out of this relationship, or is it something that could be workable? you know? But that's hard. It's hard to live with someone who can never apologize. And apologizing is not, I'm sorry you felt that way. I
No.
was only a joke. I I didn't do that, but I'll apologize anyway. No, it's, I'm sorry I hurt you. Again, even if I don't think that I did what you say I did. I'm so sorry that I never meant that. That was never my intention, but I hear that that's how it landed. And I am so sorry, you know, shouldn't be so hard to say those words, but for some people it really is. And again, that's why I say, like, please, like, start apologizing to your children now so that they know how to do it and that it's not a big deal for them. Like, of course I'm sorry. Yes, I love you, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I want to go back to something because we talked about Shalom Bayit, and we talk about it as this like lofty goal, but also there are times that it's weaponized, that Shalom Bayit is weaponized, and often more particularly against women.
Yeah.
What is your experience with that? How do we navigate that? Like when, especially like when you go to your rabbi or whatever,
Yeah.
or
So yeah,
that's
Shopify,
Shalom Bayit.
it's often used to silence women or to dismiss abuse or pressure people to stay in relationships that are not safe for the sake of peace, right? Which is disturbing and upsetting. Peace is not the absence of conflict. And it is, again, I think Shalom Bayis, again, is the presence of safety, dignity, respect. Like these are important things. And it should be like common sense knowledge, but we know like common sense is not so common. But if someone is using Torah in a way to like dominate or harm, they're misusing it. And again, that's where I say like trust your gut. Like if this doesn't feel right, if I feel like I'm being disrespected, or I feel like this shouldn't be, like I shouldn't have to say yes all the time when I don't want to say yes, or I shouldn't have to, do X, Y, and Z under the guise of, well, that's what we do, a holy wife, whatever it is. If I don't feel comfortable with it, again, there needs to be a conversation. And I always go back to like the Torah is very the Torah is about being a good person, that we are supposed to live by the rule, by the, laws and statutes of the Torah, that zarachah zarchei noam, like it's pleasant, it's good. Again, that doesn't mean it's always comfortable. Yes, certain things are maybe hard or annoying or whatever it is, certain halachot, but it shouldn't cause suffering or harm to us or danger. And I think that we have to remember that Shalom Bayis is about lifting partners up and nurturing rather than diminishing. And so if you feel like it's being weaponized against you and you're being told to get, just for Shalom Bayis, like just, Shalom Bayis does not mean that I just give in and I don't have a voice and I just agree with everything and I disrespect myself or I put myself in positions that I don't feel good about just for the sake of peace. That's not. And I think some people use that again as an avoidance tactic. Oh, we're not going to talk about it for Shalom Bayis. I
For
find
Shalom
that sometimes
Bayit.
like in-laws will do this more, that in-laws will be like, oh, I don't ask or say because Shalom Bayis, Shalom Bayis. And it's like, you don't have to not ask or have the hard conversation for Shalom Bayis. There's a way to go about it that you could ask your daughter or son or, whatever it is, you could have the conversation. So again, asking like, am I saying this to shut down something? Or am I saying it because it really is like, we want to focus on peace and this is not important. And sometimes we just have to let our egos kind of put them to the side. Or is it, I'm trying to shut someone up, I'm trying to control somebody, or someone is trying to control me. And again, if you're getting guidance from, let's say, a rabbinical guide who's saying that and it doesn't feel comfortable for you, I, you could get a second opinion. You know what I mean? You could go to someone else. And again, you could even trust your gut. And I know sometimes that's controversial to say, like maybe you could disagree with your rabbi, but you can. And that's why very often it makes me uncomfortable when people are going to, let's say, get guidance from, pastoral counseling or whatever. Again, I do think there's value in it, but sometimes those people don't know when it's out of their realm. And then they're giving advice that's dangerous, especially because most people aren't fully disclosing what's going on in their lives. And that's very scary. So you could be telling, or your partner is telling half the story, and then that's all the information they have to go on. And they don't have enough, let's say they don't have clinical knowledge or experience or whatever to say, like, hey, okay, maybe I should talk to the other half. Let me see what's up. it's really hard. So I think just being aware of that also, and again, not being afraid to use your voice, and not, I would say maybe not even letting the Jewish guilt of we're not allowed to question, or we're not allowed to push back, or yes, you are, and you should. I think that's really important, and again, advocating for yourself. We're not a religion that believes in just accepting stuff. Like, hello, the entire Gemara is fighting and arguing and not just accepting interpretations of and saying that doesn't make sense. Like, what? We are critical thinkers. We are not people who just accept. Like, look at how vastly diverse our relationship is in with religion in terms of how people observe Jewish law. We're not people who just say like, oh, all right, it is what it is. Like, use that like Jewish brain. And if something feels uncomfortable for you, or it feels off, or it feels wrong, question it. And again, like I said, trust your gut. We are not people who ignore the signs and believe in just like quieting our instincts. Like, tune into that. Um, and I think sometimes, again, maybe certain communities we're told not to, like we're just supposed to follow what everyone else does and whatever. Um, and that's where I say I think sometimes there's a positive to that. And in other spaces, it's really negative and even dangerous. So I think that's something to think about and
Yeah.
internalize.
Yeah. You and I didn't talk about this, but the other space where I get very uncomfortable in the relationship advice is social media.
Yeah.
Where where somebody will post a question anonymously in a private group, and half the respondents reply piling on in one direction and the other half in the other direction, and also everybody does it anonymously, so everybody's like hiding, which people are entitled to their privacy, but then don't be on social media maybe. But also, like, I just worry when I see people ask for advice, and clearly the woman, it's all in the spaces that I'm in, it's always the woman. I'm sure that men also struggle, but so much of the time the advice is go ask your rabbi, go ask your mashpia, go ask somebody in that space, and it's not always go to the professional, somebody who's trained in this knowledge. And and I see it in medical, like in medical questions also, that they're like, should I fast on this fast? I'm 9 months pregnant and nursing whatever, and what should I do? And so I just like those places make me cringe also. But that is a digression.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that's important because I mean, I've even seen like therapists do this online. And it's very cringy. But I know that for a long time, the relationship between like therapists and rabbis, or just whatever, like clergy in general, was pretty fraught. Like they were like, oh, therapists aren't following halacha or advising against. And actually, a book that I really like that came out recently from Koren Publishers is Nafshi B'She'elati
I have it.
of
It's
mental health.
wonderful.
It's fantastic.
It's Rabbi Yoni Rosenzweig, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, amazing. And honestly, it restored my faith a lot in that whole, because again, I can get pretty jaded. I've heard a lot of, I happen to be, I work with some wonderful rabbis and I've had very good experiences, but I've also had clients who come in that have had terrible experiences, and you can become jaded hearing how many people have been not just ill-advised, but like it's destroyed their lives listening to rabbinical halachic guidance. And so here reading this book where he really they communicated with big postgame, and so much of what they write in there is so beautiful and healthy and encouraging, and like there is a big shift now, and we are working more together. Again, in my experience, I've worked together with wonderful rabbis over the years, so I've definitely experienced it personally, but I see there is more of a shift happening now where you know rabbis understand what their limitations are. I know definitely in the smicha program at YU, I know Rabbi Larry Rothwax, if anyone knows him, fantastic about teaching rabbis where their like expertise ends and how to, refer out. And I mean, he's a clinical social worker as well, so he definitely sees it from both ends. He's a community rabbi and a clinical social worker. So we're definitely having more of these conversations, certainly in I guess, the more modern Orthodox community. Um, but I'm hoping that the shift is going to become more, we're going to see it more across the board. And again, I think there's value in halachic guidance, and I think there's value in Torah guidance and clinical guidance, but they don't have to contradict each other. They
Right.
can work hand in hand. I don't think I'm ever saying anything to my clients that is against halacha. Like I don't, and if I ever thought it might be, I would consult with, a halachic guide. So I think that that's really important also. Like this book, I think generally, laymen can read it. Like you don't have to be a clinician or a rabbi or in that position to read it. But it's very encouraging. I see a lot of good movement in that area. So
Amazing.
yes.
I'm looking at the time.
Okay.
Is there anything that you want to add? If there's,
I think for further reading, I would encourage people, we can send out a list. I can send you some
Mhm,
books for people
that'd
to
be
read.
wonderful.
Because I love these things, and I always want people to like take the motivation of like, oh, I got some good information, like continue learning. So I can send a book list and podcasts. You can go on my website. I have some blog articles I've written
What
on
is your website, Rachel?
racheltuchman.com. So you can check out some of the things I've written there, but continue learning. Like if you've heard things today that make sense, that sounded good to you, keep going, don't lose the momentum. And I guess I would just say if there's someone that you need to apologize to in your life, I hope I inspired you to do it today. All good relationships, they start with good apologies, healing, repair. Um, so definitely doing that too.
I was going to say healing, repair, and being heard.
Yes. Yes. And when I apologize to you, it means that I heard. I heard what you said. I heard that I hurt your feelings. I heard that you didn't like what I did. I heard, even if I'm thinking, can you not take a joke? I don't say that.
Right.
Clearly, it wasn't a joke. If you didn't think it was funny, that means it wasn't funny, even if I thought it was funny. If a comedian goes to a room and tells a joke and nobody's laughing, is he funny? No.
Mhm.
So it's not funny. If the person that you like, were directing it to is not laughing, doesn't matter what you thought, like just apologize, so but again, that's very hard for people. So apologizing, repair, yes, it's respect, it's validation, it's I see you, I hear you, I love you, I care about you. And it's really at the core of like good relationships with everyone, not just romantic. Like I said, our kids, our friends, our community members, our clients. I apologize to clients if I hurt them. Like that's what we do. So
Great. Thank you so, so, so much.
thank you.
I always enjoy my time with you, and I learned so much from you, both in person and on your Instagram account and your website. And thank you again. We'll be sharing resources, and I hope everybody has a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you, and happy Tu B'Av.
Yes.
Bye.